impact study. This is going to be a very interesting study. Exactly 3 weeks before the games will be starting, so this is extremely relevant to the city of Vancouver as a whole right now. Just a little bit of a background about how this came to be. So this event is sponsored by the Irving K. Barber Learning Center Olympic Programming Group, which is actually a collaboration between the programming staff at this library and the UBC library, with its mandate to initiate and support innovative Olympics and Paralympics related programming here at UBC. This is also supported by an organization called the Student Olympic Collaborative, which I happen to be a part of. I'm actually one of the co-chairs, and one of our mandate is actually to put on relevant Olympics-related events or collaborate with other organizations on Olympics-related events prior to the Olympics as well as after. So one of the things that my group is really involved in right now is helping plan the torch relay at UBC when it comes here on February 11th. We're also planning a conference for March 12th, which will, no, not March 12th, I think March 27th, which will assess the immediate post-impacts of the games. So that's kind of a little follow-up to what we'll be seeing here. So the Olympic Games Impact Program has been developed by the International Olympic Committee to objectively measure and report on the effects of Olympic Games on the host city, the larger environment, and its citizens. The purpose of the OGI is to advance the sustainability of the Games, promote positive legacies, and also create a knowledge base from which future hosts can draw upon and really use to enhance the Olympic experience overall. How this data was collected was from 126 indicators, which includes a range of 80 environmental, social, cultural, and economic indicators that will assess the context with which the games will be held, and a suite of 46 indicators which will assess the event itself. So each indicator is carefully analyzed to produce a very comprehensive report, which the team will be detailing in a few minutes. A technical manual for the Olympic Games impacts has also been prepared by the IOC to describe the purpose and scope of the indicators as well as these calculation methods. So there's going to be a lot of interesting data on display, but also presented in a comprehensive manner that we will all be able to understand, including myself, hopefully. Specific data collection forms have also been prepared in the study to help collate and present the indicator data in a consistent way. So depending on each of the 126 indicators that were used, data was requested for different geographic scales, ranging from the host city to the region to the country. So this is a very comprehensive study that takes into account all the different effects and on all different levels of impact. So this study actually covers a period of 12 years, and it's ongoing right now because the last year that the data will take into effect is 2012, and it involves 4 reports. The first report serves as a baseline, which focuses on the context indicators and data for the reference year, and that is 2 years prior to the host city election, which would be 2001 in the case of Vancouver, as Van Ock was bidding for the Games. The second report was issued in December 2009, which was just a month ago, and it includes data trends from approximately 2001 to 2006. So that's about a 5-year data trend indication. The third report will be issued shortly after the 2010 Games and will include both context and event indicators. The fourth paper will be issued in 2013 and is intended to present trends over the 12-year period, including legacy-type impacts that may occur after the Games. As the Olympics doesn't just come to the city, it also leaves a lot of legacies, such as like the buildings and infrastructure that have been erected for the Games will create a lasting impact on Vancouver and its region. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rob up to the podium to explain more about this study and introduce the rest of the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. My name is Rob Van Wynsberghe, and I'm a lead on the OG study, and it's our pleasure to be here. It's good to contribute to the university and Irving K. Barber, and especially a student group looking at some of the some of the things going on generally around the Olympic Games and some of the research being done. So it's great for us to be here. Like Denise said, I want to start off by introducing folks. After we do that, we've got a short video which is a segue into our research. It talks about what impacts are, because I think that's an important introductory step in appreciating kind of what we're up to. After that, I've got a fairly brief PowerPoint that hits on some of the points that Denise brought up already, but adds a bit more to what we're doing and kind of reinforces things. And then after that, we have a survey. I know that we've got some timing around a break at 4:50, so what we'll probably try to do is video, PowerPoint, break, and then answer questions and do the survey, and hopefully that all works out in terms of timing. So let me just start by letting Trish introduce herself and a little bit about her background and her interest in the project.
Hi, I'm Trisha. I'm going to be giving you a little undergraduate perspective on being involved with this OGI study. So I was just any other student, and I was finishing my exams before last summer, and I was just on the UBC website trying to find out something that would impress me coming from UBC, and I just came across this little blurb about this study, and I was just really interested because I'm now in my 4th year in the Faculty of Forestry. I'm studying natural resource conservation. So I know a lot of people they're not really familiar with the Faculty of Forestry, and they just think foresters, but there's actually this program which I'm in, which we actually study like social implications, policy, globalization, and a lot of ecological implications to do anything with development and environmental factors. And so while I have been looking at before, after, control, impact studies with biological perspectives in my program, I was really, really interested in the OGI study because it was going to implement that with more social, economic, and environmental issues. And all these issues are going to be brought up, obviously, during the Olympics, before and after. And so I was really interested in being involved in this study. So if I could give you a little idea of what I do, I'm involved in the work study. So a work study at UBC is a really good way for students like me to have a flexible schedule and be a part of research and get that idea of what research is like behind the scenes. Usually you apply to some kind of research team that you are interested in, and this one I was. And so usually, because as you heard, there are 126 indicators. That is a lot of indicators. And so usually we will go through them really slowly, and we'll look at the technical report, and it'll give us an idea of what kind of information we are looking for and what kind of data we need to find. And so I'll go and do that, and sometimes we'll find it, sometimes we won't, and sometimes it's basically a learning experience. And so if I can't find the data just right out there, usually we'll find a contact and we'll email them, say at Metro Vancouver or just about anywhere, and we'll just try to email them and get any kind of information they're willing to give us. And so usually, because I feel like because I'm an undergraduate, they're pretty good at helping us out, because they know that we're just trying to learn. And yeah, and so that's all I have to say.
Thanks. Thank you, Tricia. I just wanted to introduce one other member of our team that's participating in this part of the presentation, and that's Clark Lim, and let Clark.
Hi, my name is Clark Lim, and I'm actually, I guess, a previous grad student here coming back again to do my PhD. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the Civil Engineering Department in Transportation Engineering. And I have a background in, I guess, 18 years or so working in the field in government and consulting and transportation planning especially. And I guess through my career I've been working on a number of strategic sort of planning and impact analyses related to transportation in terms of economic, environmental, and social impacts. And so when I was asked to be part of this team, it actually fit a lot of things that I've done and my interests. And I felt I could possibly contribute. And even though, as Trish mentioned, that there's it's a huge scope, 126 indicators, and my expertise is really a sliver of that. What's fascinating about the project is that I can learn from sort of others and learn about sort of studying impacts on different sectors such as homelessness and energy and things like that. So I hope as much as you learn here, we're actually, as a team, learning quite a bit, and it's very fitting to be a part of a study that's actually at the university.
So I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm a sociologist by training. I'm currently in the School of Human Kinetics and Department of Educational Studies. I have a background in the area of sustainability with some work in health promotion. And so the reason I was chosen to be the lead on this project is mostly because of the background in sustainability, but also my involvement with the Olympic Games in the past. And I looked at the 1968 Games for my thesis, and I've been involved as a community member. So we have a real spectrum of people involved in the project, and it's a real strength, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'd like to start, however, with a very brief video that introduces the notion of impacts in relationship to the 2010 Games. And if you recognize the song, talk to Clark, because he's another fan of Joe Satriani's. So we'll get this started, and yeah, Clark, if you could please do that. Yeah.
I took the song off my sorry.
Oh, the song's off.
We can, unfortunately.
The Olympic Games. What do you think of when you hear those words? The modern Olympic Games were revived in the late 1800s. They were based in part on the fundamental principle that the goal of Olympism is to place sport at the service of the harmonious development of man, with a view to promoting a peaceful society concerned with the preservation of human dignity. Over 100 years later, the Olympic Games have grown in size. Cities continue to compete for an opportunity to host the Games. However, the Olympic Games are not just about elite athletes excelling in sport. Many people around the world are affected by such a large event. What other effects are there? Are they positive or negative? Do more tourists visit the host city? Or do tourists avoid the city because they think there will be crowding and lineups? Do businesses and investments increase? Are there more jobs? And are they temporary or long-term? Do people pay more for goods and services? How much public money do governments spend for the Olympic Games? What could this money have been spent on instead? Are there fewer natural open spaces for people to enjoy because they are removed to accommodate the Olympic Games? Or are more natural spaces created? Is there more traffic? Is there long-term planning to ease traffic and promote sustainable transportation? How much energy do the Olympic Games use? How much of it is renewable, such as solar energy? How much water do the Olympic Games use? How much waste do the Olympic Games produce? How much is reused or recycled? Do the Olympic Games inspire people to exercise? Do the Olympic Games raise awareness of accessibility for people with disabilities? Are Olympic venues accessible to them? Do the Olympic Games showcase and promote local arts and culture? Do students learn about fair play? Do they participate in sport? What else can students learn from the Olympic Games? Do the Olympic Games prevent people from getting to places because of tighter security? Is this temporary, or is the security infrastructure still there after the Games? Do the Olympic Games displace people from their homes because landlords renovate apartments in the hopes of profiting from tourists who are willing to pay more during the Games? Do people pay more for housing? The potential effects of the Olympic Games are varied. Such a large worldwide event should be evaluated. The International Olympic Committee is attempting to do just that through its Olympic Games Impact Study. For the 2010 Games in Vancouver, a research team at the University of British Columbia is conducting the study. The results will tell us what the impacts of the Olympic Games are, and are they positive or negative? What we learn from the study will help guide us in answering an important question. How can we ensure that as many people as possible benefit from the Games, while ensuring that as few people as possible lose out?
So that was just a brief introduction into some of the work that we're doing. It touches on just a few of the indicators that we're studying in order to make judgments about the impacts of the Games. We call it our little infomercial. Hopefully it gives some sense of what we're doing. What I'm going to do now is introduce the project in a bit more detail using a PowerPoint. I'll reduce it to probably I can do it for about 20 minutes, and I think we'll take a break and then come back with questions and answers. But if folks feel like they need something answered in order to kind of move on, I think it's important to be able to get those questions answered as we're moving through it. So I can stop and answer questions, and quite comfortable doing that. So the title of the presentation is Olympic Games Impact Study, Historical, Conceptual, and Methodological Considerations. The history is absolutely crucial here because this is about a very old organization that's taking the lead on the sustainability of big sporting mega events. So I think that's important to understand. Conceptually, this is important to understand because not many people think about the big events like this in the way that we introduced in the video. That is an athletic event, but also something that affects the host a great deal. And increasingly, the effects on the host are important. And we want to make sure folks kind of delineate those two things for the purpose of understanding the impacts. And methodological is our attempt to show you how we tried to make what is kind of an enormous undertaking feasible, and how ultimately we tried to speak to sustainability, which is really, really crucial to this project, and also to the people involved in the project. So we'll just move forward then. So objectives, I'll introduce the research team, how we gather information, how we analyze it, some of the results, and then at the end we'd like to talk a little bit about the implications for UBC, for the Olympic movement potentially, and that's hopefully something that's of interest to people as we move forward. I mentioned that the Olympic Games is at the forefront of a movement by big sport mega events adopting sustainability as one of their important considerations. And this is all quite recent. So in 2004, environment was added to the Olympic Charter not too long ago. The International Olympic Committee created its own Agenda 21 that I'm going to introduce in a second, which falls out of Rio in 92's Agenda 21. And this final important development was the adaptation of the environment as the third Olympic pillar. Culture and sport are the other two. What's interesting about this is that there's a cultural Olympiad, there's obviously an Olympic Games, but there's no environmental Olympiad. So when we're thinking about what we might be involved in as a host and what our legacy might be, perhaps it's to have 2 or 3 days devoted to the environment in an Olympic-like atmosphere. It has never happened before. So it's something to think about as this pillar gets developed. Olympic Agenda 21, it's a lot of information on the slide. I think the key thing is the material on the left-hand side, because it introduces the idea that sustainability is conceptualized by the International Olympic Committee in that classic Venn diagram way, where it's the social, the environmental, and the economic. So improved socioeconomic conditions refers to the economic, conservation and management of resources, is the environmental, and the strengthening of major groups is the social. So the IOC has thought about sustainability in very classic ways. Some of what we do actually challenges that a little bit, and I think that's important to think about the fact that there may be a different way to think about sustainability as a byproduct of investigating whether mega events are sustainable or whether mega events can actually contribute to sustainability, which I see as kind of our underlying research interest. The Olympic Games impacts objectives measure the global impact of the Olympic Games, global in the sense of comprehensive. We're not attempting to figure out how 2010 affects Tibet, but we are trying to understand in a comprehensive way how the games affect the host region, which is the lower mainland, the province, and the country ultimately. And I'll talk about that in some detail. The second point is to create a comparable benchmark. The notion here is that what we find as games impacts for 2010 might be something we can compare and contrast to future games in order to enhance sustainability. The third is the kind of dream objective of perhaps having the Olympic Games have as its criteria for choosing bids the idea of sustainability. So the possibility that OGI gets used as criteria for deciding who gets to host. And obviously that's exciting to us as researchers in this area. Essentially, OGI is an independent evaluation of the overall impacts of the games against a sustainability standard. So independent means UBC. Right? Did you?
No, sir.
Okay. And so the idea is that ultimately you look at these impacts, but you say something about them in relationship to sustainability, and that's critical to us. It's one thing to say, here are the numbers, but if you don't talk about those numbers in terms of sustainability, then it's difficult to contribute to sustainability. So we've worked really hard at that, and I'll talk about it. We're the first group to be doing the Olympic Games impact research in a comprehensive way. Previous hosts have done bits and pieces. We're doing the whole thing. I was recruited to be in charge of what is a group of economists and engineers, writers, education students, forestry students, law students, so folks from all over campus. We also have an expert resource group, which is people from all levels of government, folks from the university, folks from NGOs who contribute to what we're doing. And as Trish alluded to, we request data from them, and they're absolutely crucial to that and looking at what we're doing and how we're doing it and commenting on it. So we're pretty broad-based, and we're excited about that. I think it's something that's great about our work. It's 126 indicators, which is a lot, but it's 3 and 4 kind of dimensions to each indicator. So it's one thing to talk about an indicator, a kind of reflection of a value that society has, but we have to understand that we have to gather at least 4 separate numbers to roll up to that indicator across 3 scales. City scales, provincial scales, regional scales, and sometimes national scales. So oftentimes for one indicator we're looking at a huge amount of information, and I'm going to give you an example in a second just to sort of show you that. It's a 12-year reporting period for the project, so we go back to 2001 to gather some data, and then we ultimately report out on 2011 data. So we're actually reporting for a period of time that occurs 2 years before the games are awarded and then 3 years after the games are hosted. And the intention there is to kind of capture some of the things that are going on in the region to tell a more complete story about the games and their impacts. We have to collect indicators about the milieu of the region in which the games are hosted and the games themselves and Paralympic Games. The kind of region as it exists is called context. And context is described in the technical manual as the environment in which the games will be staged. So I think that the best way to think about it is this final point here, which is the already there and the regardless of the event. It is this region as it exists without the games, if you will. And the games come in and have their own footprint. So we have to look at indicators that talk about this context, and then indicators that talk about how much pop was drank during the Olympic Games. And it's that combination that gives you a kind of a complete story. So I said I would give you one example, and I chose a kind of politically interesting example because there's a lot of conversation about this, and we were asked a lot of questions about this when we released our pre-Games report in December. So this is one indicator called SO31, Socio-Cultural Indicator 31. We're asked to look at the homeless, low-rent market and affordable housing. So it's one indicator that deals with pretty massive areas: homelessness, low-rent market housing, and affordable housing. So it's a big indicator, which then has us looking at things like the number of low-income families, the number of new non-market housing projects or social housing projects, and on, across 3 different scales. So City of Vancouver, the Greater Vancouver Regional District, or what's called Metro Vancouver, and the country as a whole. So if folks follow the news, you know that there's debates about numbers associated with, say, the number of homeless in Vancouver. So we have to dig into those debates, come up with numbers, and present those numbers, not only for the City of Vancouver, but also for the region and also for the country. And it's a very interesting indicator, but it's not abnormal in terms of the amount of stuff that we have to gather to try to fill out these worksheets, which then allow us to talk about the impacts. Just to give you one example of how interesting it becomes, the disparity between the City of Vancouver's numbers of social housing units and Pivot Legal's number of social housing units, neighbors, it gets close to 2,000. So a 2,000 unit disparity between 2 sources of data on the question of how many social housing units were built in the city during a period of time before the Games. So this affects how we do our analysis, obviously, but just at the level of trying to get a number into a little cell, you can imagine the kind of digging that goes on. So this is but one indication, or one indicator, and just one example of what we're doing. We operated according to some principles which were absolutely necessary because we are an arm's length, neutral, objective group. So we have to be careful about the way that we gather our information because folks may make claims about who we work for and that kind of thing. So we operate according to some pretty strict principles. We base our work on what's called a technical manual. This is a 300-page document that comes from the International Olympic Committee, and it basically says, here are the indicators, here's how we want you to measure them. Apparently it's one of 28 technical manuals, so VANOC has to do all of their work according to a series of technical manuals. We have our own, and we follow it. We have another principle, which is the Games are ultimately about sustainability. So we try to push ourselves in gathering our information to think about how indicators are negative or positive in regards to sustainability. And the third principle is that we were driven by the idea that we had to be really careful about context indicators because it's really hard to tell a story of a region that begins to change in at least 2001 for 2010 Games, if not 1998, if not 1986. We have some evidence to suggest that we started thinking about trying to win the bid in the late 80s. That means that you change directions in your region in order to put yourself in a position to win, which affects policies, makes decisions that may not have been made had we chose not to go after the Games. So we knew this very early on. We knew that there was policy directions taken. And so what we said as a research team is we have to come up with a unique way of looking at the context of the region in which the Games are going to be situated in 3 weeks. I mentioned some of the members of the research team introduced themselves, just to give you a sense of kind of what it looks like. We have a steering committee, we have an expert resource group, we have indicators data managers, and indicator analysts, policy analysts who provide other information, And we've also just hired a transdisciplinary writer. So somebody who helps us work together, because we have different backgrounds, to disseminate information in ways that make sense for different audiences. And this is kind of a unique aspect of work like ours, but I think it's going to be powerful. Trish has introduced the idea of work study students being involved, and this has been a bit of a godsend to the project. So the province of British Columbia supports undergraduate students being involved in research at the University of British Columbia. So we've had, I believe, 4 or 5 work study students, and they've been terrific. And so what it really shows is that undergraduates at the University of British Columbia, if not grad students, are skilled and can contribute to research projects that in this case we're just getting up off the ground. So this is not a mature project. This was started last September, 2008, September of 2008. So it's not that old, and so it's a real credit, and it's a real finding, and it's something that we've shared with the media and different audiences, and I think it's a real bonus to the project. This slide is designed to show you how we attempted to take information and roll it up to a point where we could say something about the overall report in terms of sustainability. On the bottom right-hand side, there is a small box called metadata, which basically means that each indicator has a worksheet. Each worksheet has numerous cells, basically a number that you've got to find. But behind that number often sits calculations, contact information, and we have a cell-by-cell database for each indicator. And I'll introduce that in a second. Each little bit of information that is in each of these cells helps us to determine the number that fits into that cell, which in turn helps us to understand one dimension or one variable of an indicator. So as you saw with the homelessness, there's a number of variables that we have to get information on. Those roll up into an indicator. What we tried to do was put together indicators that belong together, and we called these bundles, and I'll talk about this in a little more detail. The reason we did that is because we think we want to tell a story of games impacts that we can continue to tell as we move forward. So it's not just one report, here's the information, but we're actually going to try to pick up where we left off when we do our subsequent reports. And it's important for us to tell a complete story, and bringing indicators together that belong together helps us to do that. So one of the indicator bundles is something called land use, another's transportation, another's air and water. So numerous indicators are rolled up. These belong in specific spheres, obviously. Land use, transportation, air and water belong in what's called the environmental sphere. So then we have a kind of an impact assessment of each of the spheres. Then we roll together the social, the environmental, and the economic into an overall assessment of OGI. So this is our process, and this is what we were attempting to put together. We have to be very, very careful about collecting data because, to be honest, we're borrowing numbers from people in many cases. So Stats Canada does a census, and we knock on their door. And in most cases, we're pretty confident in Stats Canada. But in other cases, we're calling up organizations who may not collect data as part of what they do. We're asking them to collect information that we want, and we're asking them to do it the way that we want them to do that, which is a bit odd. And in some cases, depending on who picks up the phone, you actually get them collecting the numbers you want differently. And we've had this happen where we've actually said, thank you for what you've given us. Can you please put us on to the person we talked to at the previous conversation? And so the example is Tourism BC, I believe, was the example, where someone was nice enough to collect all the information for us, but created new categories from the previous person, which threw off our ability to comment on the number of people who had come to conventions in the city of Vancouver. This is absolutely crucial because one of our findings in the pre-games report was an increase in the number of people who came to Vancouver to attend conferences and the types of conferences they attended. So you need this information. It has to be right. All of this is designed to make sure that we're really confident in what we're getting, and we go through a fairly rigorous process in doing this. The other thing that's absolutely crucial to a project like this is making sure that we have information stored in ways that other people can't access that information. We get probably 2 media requests a day right now. Throughout the project, I was asked probably 2 times per week for information. So folks know that we're collecting information about, say, homelessness, and they'd like to get an objective opinion on how many people are homeless during a pre-games period. So we have to be careful. We have to back up everything that we're doing, and we did so in a very careful manner. So this is just to document part of that. It's obviously new to a university too. I mean, I've been here for a decade, and I don't often get requests for data, and I never am afraid that somebody's going to take my data. But this is quite different. This is a very public situation, so we had to be extremely careful. This slide is really designed to talk about the fact that we had to go through a very careful process of figuring out who had information and what process we would follow to get information should it not be available. And so this is basically a decision tree that someone like Trish would have to follow in trying to find information. So obviously if the information is available through StatsCan, there's no problem. But if it's Stats Canada information and they're not releasing it, then we call the StatsCan library at the University of British Columbia and ask that person. They may say yes or no. Then we call Ottawa. And if Ottawa doesn't give us the information, then Trish calls Clark, and Clark has to call Ottawa. And if Clark doesn't get then he gives it to me. And we had to do this in a systematic fashion, because you can't call Ottawa 3 times and not be clear about why the same group is calling the same person in Ottawa about that information. So we had this decision tree to help us to do this work, to make sure that we were getting good information. And it was something we put together at the beginning, which helped us to gather. As I mentioned, cell by cell information was gathered. So in this particular case, you can see 10% highlighted for a specific indicator. Behind that cell was a database that gave us the exact reference for that information. It also gave us the exact name of the person that gave us that information. In addition, we as a group provided our sense of the reliability of the information. This is absolutely crucial, because the International Olympic Committee looks at what we do and says, I don't believe that number. And you have to back up every single number that you have, so it resides in one of 3 databases that we have in the project, cell by cell. So for this particular indicator, I'm guessing, what would there be, 40, 50 cells? Yeah, so each of those is kind of filled out independently. Each of the indicators resides in its own database so that we can get the information quickly. I would highlight here the fact that we again gave it a reliability rating so that we were confident as a group in the reliability. Now, methodologically, I started to mention this idea that we were interested in the whole story of indicators. So I'll try to give you an example to talk about bundling as an effort to try to connect indicators with policies and other investments. So the example that I would give is Act Now BC, and I'm not sure if folks are familiar with Act Now BC. Policy put in place to say that in the province of British Columbia, by 2010, we would be 20% more physically fit. Does that ring a bell? High school students who are here may recognize this as being asked to do 150 minutes of exercise per week and to monitor yourself. So it played itself out in that way. It's a policy designed to get people more physically active. Why this matters to 2010 is that it will affect some of the indicators that we look at. So we look at health and physical activity indicators, which may change because you put in place something called Act Now BC, Healthy Schools, etc., etc. What's also important about this is it represents tens of millions of dollars. it's a massive investment in trying to get folks more physically active as a way to leverage the Olympic Games. So the Olympic Games has all these meanings attached to physical activity. A policy is put in place. So as researchers, we said, we have to link these two things. We cannot pretend that Act Now BC and health and physical activity indicators have no relationship. This is bundling. This is what we call bundling. So we went through the process of trying to connect those two things up. It becomes increasingly interesting as you move forward because Act Now BC, under different economic times, is now threatened. So the Games are over in 6 weeks. Act Now BC, which is a big investment, may be gone in 7. So did we actually, as an impact of the Olympic Games, increase physical activity and health through a policy called Act Now BC? Or did we, or didn't we? And that's what we're trying to do as a research project. And this is just one example. This is, for us, very, very interesting. I was on the Olympic line the other night, and I don't know if anybody's been on the Olympic line, going from Granville Island to Cambie Street. It's a streetcar that Bombardier built for Brussels in Belgium. Brussels donated it to Vancouver. You can get on it, and it goes from Cambie to Granville, which is about a 5-minute streetcar ride. Unbelievable streetcar. Most beautiful streetcar I've ever been on in my life. Tracks were laid down that apparently cost $8 million. So a streetcar is put in place to highlight new forms of public transportation during the Olympic Games. These could be gone after the Olympic Games. Or we may decide, because 2,500 people a day are taking it, that we want to create a streetcar system for the city of Vancouver. The new tracks laid down cost $8 million. A new system through the city is approaching $90 million. The Games are the kind of fulcrum, right, for a decision about public transportation in the city of Vancouver using a streetcar. This, for us, is what impacts are all about. This kind of story of policy connected with changes in public transportation, which is something that we're tracking in terms of indicator research. And I think this is really why this is very interesting work. It's not just a number. The other thing I would mention is that when we did our policy research, this streetcar showcase was supposed to cost under $100,000. I think, I'm not positive about this, but the new streetcar is so beautiful because in part it's so heavy, which meant you needed better tracks, hence the $8 million. So again, not something that's anticipated, but it's something we get to track because we're doing this work, and it's very interesting. So I'll just give you one other example. And again, not a straightforward one, although you would think it would be. This is an indicator tracking medal counts. So basically, how well are we doing as a country? And the answer is that we're doing better and better. And the reason we're doing better and better is because female athletes are doing better and better. So that's great. That's numbers. But why? What is it that we're doing well as a country to lead to success in terms of the Olympic Games and other international competitions? Well, it turns out that we got embarrassed as a country in '88. We didn't win very many medals in Calgary. No gold, right? Which is a part of a couple of advertising campaigns, right? To try to win gold for 2010. In addition, we've put in place what's called Own the Podium, which is a technological kind of effort to create better equipment for our athletes. And we're tracking athletes at a younger and younger age to decide whether they'd be good bobsledders or not, or that kind of idea. So what's happened is that we're doing quite well. And I'll just give you some of the results. We've got them in a little bit, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. So that's another example of what we're trying to do. And I'll talk about those results in a second. Another thing that we're trying to do kind of methodologically is to compare similar cities to what we're finding in the city of Vancouver, similar regions to GVRD, and similar results that we're finding provincially. So we're comparing everything to cities like Calgary, Victoria, and Edmonton, or the greater Toronto area. And the reason you have to do this is that you have to try to separate out changes in trends that may be affected by other factors other than the Olympic Games. So if we see changes in trends here, but Calgary also has changes in trends and Edmonton has changes in trends, it's unlikely it's the Olympic Games that's responsible. So we're doing that work. It gets quite interesting because you're looking at cities in different provinces, and there's all kinds of political reasons why things are different. But it's interesting work. Ultimately, as I mentioned, we're trying to say something about sustainability. And the way that we're approaching this is for each of the indicators, we're giving it a positive or negative impact score, in addition to trying to decide how confident we are in the quality and availability of data, plus trying to, as a team, decide whether we feel like the conclusions we reach about individual indicators are ones that we're confident about or not. So for each of the indicators, we have a mathematical equation that looks at impact score, reliability, something we call conclusivity, to give us an overall idea of the impact of that single indicator. And then we roll it up, as I said, indicator by indicator, bundle by bundle, sphere by sphere, to give us an overall score. And this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where you actually can say something ultimately about the sustainability of the Olympic Games, because you can say something about the impacts of each of the indicators. Oops. We just came out with the pre-Games results report in December. We actually finished it last May, I think, but it went through the International Olympic Committee. They had to okay it. BANOC okayed it. Basically, it's a 350-page report, and conservatively speaking, there's probably 1,500 pages of data that sits behind it. And as I mentioned, 3 databases. Overall, we said that from the years 2001 to 2006, our pre-Games period, there's been a slight positive Games impact. Socioculturally, it's positive, in large measure because elite amateur sport has done quite well. No impact on health and physical activity, which isn't a surprise. Host city image, we had to back off on how confident we were on the data in terms of host city image because of housing and homelessness. So we conservatively decided that it was a neutral situation. Environmentally, the big finding for us was air quality in the Sea to Sky Highway region. So negative impact on air quality, probably because of the construction on Sea to Sky. So that might mean that it's temporary, although one of the things that we'll have to track now is whether we're going to build suburbs or some kind of development on the highway, because you have a 4-lane highway that's just absolutely beautiful now, which will have a long-term effect on the air quality. But for now, we believe it's attributable to the Sea to Sky Highway. Economically, I mentioned tourism and the fact that there are more people coming to conventions. The other big finding for us, which was also positive, was the idea that there's new businesses in the Whistler region in particular, which makes sense. I mean, they're hosting the Olympic Games. It's an area that doesn't have all the businesses one would need to host an Olympic Games. So these businesses emerged fairly quickly, and we identified them in our data. So that's potentially positive as well. A couple things that we're pretty proud of on top of that work is we did special inserts on 2 issues, housing and on the Paralympics. The housing we did, we approached by asking an international media expert to comment on what media around the world think of Vancouver as we led up to the Games. It was extremely interesting because this person says that small things that occur, or seemingly small things that occur, make their way around the world, and you can get a lot of media attention, positive and negative. So housing and homelessness, for example, does reach the world, especially when you're about to host an Olympic Games. The other thing that this person brought up was the Robert Japansky issue, and the kind of media attention that had internationally, which may not be surprising. So we thought it was important to talk about these things, to talk about housing and homelessness in terms of the outside world as fed by the media. And we also did a special insert on Paralympics because there's 5 indicators that we attend to in our research on perceptions of people with disability as changed by athletes with disabilities. So the possibility that the Paralympics may change perceptions of people with disabilities more generally. In addition, we tracked accessibility. We also tracked training programs and tried to kind of put these together into an insert that dealt with the Paralympics. The exciting part for us is that these were fairly small parts of a big report, but they got a lot of attention, and we've just done another survey on some of these issues. That's national, 1,600-person national survey, and we're going to be able to talk about it. And the International Paralympic Committee, the Canadian Paralympic Committee, the University of British Columbia have all said, we really want you to do a big focus of your work on the Paralympics. And so I guess you could say it's under negotiation. But it's exciting. And I did want to bring up this last piece. So we talked a little bit about how we're doing in terms of medals, and I think, 3 weeks before the games, everybody wants to know exactly how well we're going to do. So we have a bit of a formula, I think, that might help us to understand that. And it's a kind of number of medals by individual athletes ratio. So let me just sort of show you the past. So the number of medals per athlete, I think in 2006, is 0.015 medals per. So if you took the Canadian team and you multiplied it by that, you might be able to get some sense of what of how we're going to do. But I would also add something else. As I mentioned, the female athletes are primarily responsible for how well we're doing, but you can see how female athletes have done from 1998, 0.13 medal per female athlete, and you can see that we're doing increasingly well. So you might be able to anticipate how many medals we might be able to get as a country by using this formula and thinking about the number of female athletes on our team, which I don't know. So that's all to say that this is interesting, applicable work, and that you might be able to tell your friends how many medals we're going to win by using this. And you heard it here first, which is very exciting. Okay, so that's kind of the presentation part of this. I think we're going to take a bit of a break, is that correct? And they'll come back with questions, and we have a brief survey we want to give to folks just to contribute to our work. Thank you. So, are there any questions about the project?
I was just wondering when the last Olympic Games impact study was completed.
Yeah, the last time that OGI was done was basically bits and pieces have been done. Beijing did some of the OGI work and did it differently, and Torino actually did some of it as well. So this is the first comprehensive time. For the first time it's been done in a comprehensive manner. So all the indicators we're going to try to address. Yeah.
Was this a requirement to host the Olympics here? Do you know?
The question is this a requirement? The answer is yes. It's something that VANOC is contractually obligated to do, and they have to hire an independent external group to do it as well. So thanks.
To my knowledge, there are 3 economic impact studies done by 3 different organizations. Yeah. UBC, and then PwC, and then SFP was involved with a couple of parties. Is there any way to cooperate? So, for example, with the economic impact, I can see that, for example, businesses in Whistler will get a couple of surveys from 3 organizations. Yeah. Do you see that happen?
So the question was, with PricewaterhouseCoopers doing more of an economic kind of impact assessment, and with VANOC doing their sustainability reports, and with the OGI study, is there overlap in the indicators? Could cooperation have led to perhaps fewer And the answer is yes. It would have had to start with Vanok doing performance management in a comprehensive enough manner to address things like context. So at the level of the event, I would say that the overlap with our event indicators is quite good. The context that we're interested in is not something they've spent a great deal of time on. So, say 7 years ago, had the decision been made to do performance management in a comprehensive way that included OGI, I'd say absolutely yes. PricewaterhouseCoopers, to me, is slightly different because they, in my kind of crude thinking, have been hired to specifically assess programs and policies that governments have put in place to leverage the Olympic Games. So I don't believe they're doing evaluation. I would call it more assessment, because they're not comparing it against the standard, which they could have done, but they didn't. And I would say that what they're commenting on is government investments in leveraging the games, which is slightly different than what we're doing. Having said that, we have met with them, and there is overlap for the tourist indicators and from several other indicators. So all three could have worked together. That would have had to start a number of years ago. From our perspective, we're going to push for the Olympic Games impact indicators to be the source of criteria for bids. And in some ways, we hope to award prospective hosts that look like they're the most ambitious in terms of sustainability. So we hope to create an index. We hope that that index is used to help prospective hosts say, here's how well we can do on that index as a way of arguing for their being the host. What this does in the dream world, of course, is help cities that are able to move the most on sustainability to win. Now, when the CTV asked us that question after the pre-games report, they then contacted the IOC, and they said that group at UBC said that this might be criteria for future bids. And the person who's high up in the IOC said it's not in the cards. So they like the idea of information, but as researchers, I think we learned a long time ago that more information doesn't make change. More information just is more information. So we we would take a different stance. So as researchers, we have a program of work that we're doing, and then we have a bunch of work that we're doing for our contract to Vanok. And hopefully those two roles meet. So, yeah. Any other questions? You can ask Clark, Trish, anyone. Yes.
I wondered if evaluating people's disabilities.
Yeah, I should have more fully explained that. The reason we had to choose an insert in part is because no one in Canada is collecting a lot of comprehensive information on people with disabilities. So you're an indicators research group, you look for numbers that exist. They don't exist because the research isn't being done. That's in part why we've now done this kind of national survey of 1,602 people to try to create a baseline for some of that Paralympic-like research so that we can do a big post-game survey. So it's a bit unfortunate, but we were able to find some information, pretty limited. We put it in our pre-games report, but the dream is kind of that we do something huge. And the other thing that's at play here is that Beijing did an incredibly comprehensive post-games Paralympic survey. So you could actually begin to do that comparative work, where you say, here's how this host did, here's how this host did. And we have that translated version of the survey at the University of British Columbia now. So it's here. Now what we have to do is go out and replicate it and just take a look at some of the differences. But I think the other thing that should be mentioned in terms of that is that Vanok went to the International Olympic Committee with the OGI indicators and said, we would like you to put Paralympic indicators in there. And to their credit, they pushed and had those indicators added. And we were really happy to do the work. But it's a bit embarrassing, actually. We can't find a great deal of data on this, especially because this particular Olympic Games is the first in many ways around the Paralympics. So the organizing committee is organizing both the Olympics and the Paralympics, and that's never been done. So we were doing a lot of firsts. It's kind of too bad we didn't have a lot of information to back up some of this other stuff, but we just don't.
How was it before they were in the Paralympics? Who was organizing?
A different organizing committee. So the difference is here that you have the VANOC folks that are responsible for the Paralympics in terms of its organizing. So the idea is that they're blended together and advertised collectively. And we now know that even the mascots, and this is not well known, but the three mascots are now 4 perhaps. I'm not sure what's happened to is it Muk-Muk? Whether Muk-Muk's the 4th or not. But one of the mascots is actually the Paralympic mascot. So they introduced all 3 original mascots. One of the 3 was for the Paralympics. But all of it was designed to kind of push for interest in the Paralympics while you're kind of drumming up interest in the Olympics. And that's what we're talking about, because that could be our legacy. That could be the thing that people remember us for, and that's important, I think.
In Beijing was the same?
No, I don't believe Beijing was the same. I think it was a separate entity. Yeah. What they did was, I'm not sure how many questions, they did this massive post-games Paralympic survey, which is, I think, quite interesting from a research perspective. Because one of the knocks against China as a country is the fact that they don't have they don't get a lot of attention to people with disabilities. And then you get this massive study being done. So it's important because it destroys perhaps some stereotypes, it begins to dialogue. And so as a research group, we talked with Beijing and said, we heard that you did a big study. Can we see it? Can we get it translated? Can we use it? So that knowledge exchange is beginning to occur as well, which is I think, important. Clark wants you to ask him. Oh, yes. Okay. So the last piece of our work is we have a 1-question survey, and we like to hand it out and collect it back, and it just kind of helps us with some of our work. So if you don't mind. Oh, they're out already. This one? Yeah, this is. In addition to that, we have cards that we can share with you that give you the website link for the project, and you may be interested in that. And, other than that, thank you very much, and we really enjoyed yourself.